I want to congratulate you on your fortitude for managing to stay through the 3 days of WEF. You are the best of the best, it would seem to me, and I just feel sorry for those who have left early and are unable to listen in to this tremendous panel of speakers that we have with us today. I think this is a fantastic topic for us to discuss, the strategies of the most dynamic economies. My name is Jeff Cutmore. I'm the presenter of Squawk Box Europe, and I spend my life interviewing business people and politicians consistently about how you get the best growth, how you sustain that growth, what tricks, what policies, what economic theories are best to adopt to continue a growth path. So hopefully we're going to learn a lot today from our various panelists about their different approaches in their different countries, and maybe we can walk out of here knowing just a little bit more than we walked into the room knowing. Let me introduce our panel. I'll just start closest to me and work my way down the line. Min Ju is Group Executive and Vice President of the Bank of China for
developing economies, of course, are heavily exposed to shocks in the external climate, and the growing risk of a U.S. recession is something to take very seriously. To its credit, China is very focused on rebalancing. Premier Wen, in his speech to the meetings in Dalian the day before yesterday, reiterated the point he's made for quite some time, that China needs a more balanced, sustainable, coordinated economy, and the 11th five-year plan is moving in that direction. The progress has probably been somewhat disappointing. You can't keep growing developing economies, whether it's China or anybody else, where the growth dynamic is concentrated as heavily as it is on the supply side, without giving support and encouragement to the demand side. That is not a sustainable outcome. Final thing I'd say is with the focus here on the supply side still in the developing world, there are negative externalities of excessive growth on the supply side, and whether those come from excess resource consumption or environmental degradation, those are both disconcerting developments. And then finally, the point needs to be made with externally focused growth models in the developing world. Not only are developing economies subject to the ups and downs of developed markets, such as a possible recession in the U.S., but they're very much subject to political pressures that may emerge in their main markets. So far this year, 18 bills have been introduced in the United States Congress that would impose some type of trade sanctions on China. That's not good news, and possibly if one of those bills passes, and I think there's a very good chance of that, that's another risk factor of an unbalanced growth model. Thank you.
Stephen, clearly the question really ought to embrace the issue of globalization in some sense. You are very bearish on the outlook for the U.S. economy, but could I ask you just to extend your view to the impact you really think a U.S. recession, or at least a serious slowdown, would have on the economies of, say, China and Vietnam and some of the other countries represented here?
Sure. Look, the U.S. consumer is a huge consumer. Just by way of comparison, Jeff, last year the U.S. consumer was about a $9.5 trillion consumer. And the Chinese consumer that everybody is talking about, that's coming to life and is really going to play an increasingly powerful role in driving the Chinese economy, is at best a $1 trillion consumer. So the idea that, you know, we can have just continued smooth growth in the world, if the U.S. consumer folds, the Chinese consumer can take over, forget it. One of China's largest export markets is America, if not its largest market, so the direct effect would be negative. A U.S. recession, it could knock maybe 2 percentage points off of Chinese GDP growth, which, of course, would not be a disaster because China is growing so rapidly. I mean, if China slows to 9%, that actually might be a helpful development for Beijing, which has been trying to cool off the Chinese economy. The area to watch out for, though, Jeff, in terms of impacts of a U.S. recession, is when we go into recession, the unemployment rate rises. And a rising unemployment rate, together with massive trade deficits in a presidential election year, is a recipe for heightened political pressure for trade sanctions. That's probably the risk that I would worry about most insofar as the impact of the U.S. recession on a rapidly growing, large developing economy like China.
Thank you very much for that. As a distant observer, I've watched the Vietnamese economy for many years. It has struck me that the desire for growth and more Western-style business practices has waxed and waned with the political leadership changes. I invite Mr. Phuc to give us his thoughts on where Vietnam is trying to take its economy at this stage and the policies it's currently embracing and which countries it sees as a useful model for its development process.
Xin cảm ơn ông Rex và tôi xin cảm ơn ông về cho tạo điều kiện tôi có dịp để mà trình bày với các vị hôm nay về kinh tế Việt Nam. Tôi cho rằng là kinh tế Việt Nam là một nền kinh tế đang chuyển đổi và đang có một sự tăng trưởng cao và được gây được sự chú ý của nhiều người, các nhà kinh tế. Trong thời gian qua, 5 năm vừa qua, kinh tế Việt Nam tăng trưởng ở mức 7,5%. Và thời gian hiện nay, chúng tôi đang xây dựng một cái kế hoạch để cho nền kinh tế Việt Nam tăng trưởng ở mức từ 8 đến 8,5%. Và năm 2006 này vừa qua tăng trưởng ở mức 8,7%. Và năm 2007 này chúng tôi đã mong mỏi một nền kinh tế tăng trưởng ở mức 8,5%. Và những năm tiếp theo đây chúng tôi sẽ tăng trưởng ở mức từ 8,5 đến 9%. Có thể nói rằng là thời gian qua Việt Nam đã có cái thành công trong vấn đề phát triển kinh tế. Cái mô hình phát triển của chúng tôi có lẽ là không phải một mô hình của bất cứ nước nào cả, mà chúng tôi có một chiến lược riêng, có một kế hoạch riêng của đất nước chúng tôi. Chúng tôi có một chính sách riêng, đó là trước hết chúng tôi xây dựng một cái chương trình phát triển kinh tế kết hợp hài hòa giữa phát triển kinh tế, xã hội và môi trường. gắn kết trên 3 trụ cột chính đó để xây dựng một cái nền kinh tế phát triển và bền vững. Để có thành tựu đó, trước hết chúng tôi xây dựng một cái chiến lược, một cái lộ trình đổi mới. Trước hết là hoàn thiện thể chế kinh tế thị trường, khơi dậy cái nguồn lực của tất cả mọi người dân của đất nước để tham gia vào phát triển kinh tế. Chúng tôi có cái hệ thống luật pháp mới, hệ thống luật doanh nghiệp mới, luật đầu tư mới, luật thương nghiệp mới, luật ngân hàng mới, luật ngân sách mới. Và các hệ thống luật đó tạo điều kiện một cái cơ sở pháp lý vững chắc cho tất cả thành phần kinh tế phát triển. Đồng thời chúng tôi chú trọng thu hút cái nguồn lực từ bên ngoài. Trước hết đó là nguồn vốn đầu tư của khu vực tư nhân, nguồn vốn viện trợ phát triển của chính phủ các nước. Và đến thời điểm này, nguồn đầu tư từ nước ngoài vào Việt Nam đã cam kết là khoảng độ 70 tỷ đô la. Nguồn vốn viện trợ nước ngoài cam kết 40 tỷ đô la. Đó là nguồn lực lớn để giúp chúng tôi phát triển. Và bên cạnh cái việc phát triển kinh tế, chúng ta luôn luôn chú trọng vấn đề phát triển xã hội, vấn đề tạo công bằng xã hội, tạo ra cái sự bình đẳng giữa các khu vực, giữa các tầng lớp dân cư, làm cho xã hội gắn kết với nhau, đảm bảo một sự ổn định và bền vững của xã hội. Điều đó là điều kiện tiên quyết cho chúng tôi phát triển kinh tế. Và sự ổn định của Việt Nam chính là cái lợi thế của Việt Nam để thu hút các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài. Và cứ như vậy đã tạo điều kiện cho Việt Nam ngày càng đi lên.
Thank you very much for your opening comments. If I could just follow up with a very quick question. The FDI inflow into many developing economies, fueled by low interest rates in the advanced world, has flattered incredibly growth rates and the performance of companies in your market. If that flow reverses, what real solid growth, domestically driven, do you think the Vietnamese economy would be able to achieve over the coming 18 months, 2 years?
Tôi hy vọng rằng là trong thời gian tới đây thì nguồn vốn đầu tư nước ngoài vẫn tiếp tục vào Việt Nam. Và đến thời điểm này thì rất nhiều nhà đầu tư từ các nước đã đến Việt Nam, đặc biệt là các nhà đầu tư từ Liên minh châu Âu, từ Hoa Kỳ, từ Nhật Bản, từ Hàn Quốc và từ Đài Loan. Và số lượng vốn và các dự án họ chuẩn bị đã tăng lên rất nhiều. Một điều đặc biệt là có những nhà đầu tư từ trước nay chưa bao giờ chú ý đến Việt Nam, nhưng hiện nay họ đã tập trung hướng chú ý vào Việt Nam. Đó là các quốc gia vùng vịnh. Các quốc gia vùng vịnh. Họ đến Việt Nam trong thời gian gần đây với những dự án đầu tư khá lớn. Và tôi cho rằng là trong tương lai thì cái dòng vốn đầu tư nước ngoài vẫn tiếp tục là một cái đóng góp tích cực cho sự phát triển kinh tế Việt Nam, góp phần làm cho kinh tế Việt Nam tăng trưởng ngày một cao hơn. Việt Nam đang còn nhiều cơ hội cho các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài, vẫn là một thị trường hấp dẫn với nguồn nhân lực dồi dào, với lợi thế chính trị ổn định, với lợi thế là Việt Nam đã gia nhập tất cả các công ước quốc tế và các luật pháp quốc tế, tạo điều kiện cho các nhà đầu tư tiếp cận thị trường quốc tế một cách cởi mở. Đồng thời khi mà ASEAN đã trở thành một thị trường thống nhất thì các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài đến Việt Nam đó sẽ có một thị trường của cả ASEAN.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Soud Ba'alaway, I wonder if I could ask you to make some points at this stage. I mean, clearly your region is trying to attract investment and foreign companies, but you're also a big exporter of capital, but that's the region. Maybe we could talk more specifically about the UAE example. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, with us, I mean, we talked about the subject about these dynamic economies. I think our experience has been something that is worth a while to share with you, just because besides, I mean, when you look at all these economies, obviously, whether it's a democratic or whether it is monarchy or the totalitarian, there are certain essential elements that actually make economy grow in a certain way. An experience we've had is that one of the most important things besides leadership, strong leadership, execution capability, I think the first thing that every economy, particularly in our part of the world, that in specific Dubai, what we have found that is to have a meritocratic system, a very strong meritocratic system, which basically allows government to separate ownership of companies and management of companies. And this is how we've been able to create world-class companies, by making these companies stand alone, having a very strong corporate governance, and also having ability for the government to select the best people to run these companies. And another important thing that also we found that was really worked for us is really the concept of having incentive system for the employees of these companies. So the meritocratic system really was very, very important for us to create the economy that today has been able to go outside and invest money into different parts of the world. I mean, our companies, for example, if you look at Emirates Airline, it's a world-class company. It's run very independent from the government, doesn't take any subsidies from the government. I mean, there are certain things, for example, I'm sure, I don't know whether you know, but in Emirates Airline, even cabin crews get bonuses, so, which is very different from a lot of airlines. So this commercialization of companies becomes very, very important to make it successful. The other thing that what we have experienced is that it's not just important in doing this, but is to create an environment. Environment is very important in terms of changing the thinking, the attitude, the way people think, the way people perceive themselves. And this environment is an environment that is conducive for entrepreneurship to grow. So we have been able to do this in a very subtle but a very meaningful way by creating different clusters of economy. We have, for example, created the first Jebel Ali free zone, which allowed actually a growth of shipping, port terminal. With Jebel Ali, we created DP World. Today, you know, DP World is one of the largest companies in terms of port operating terminal. And at the same time, we've created cluster economies like Dubai Internet City, like Dubai Healthcare City. So these cluster economies became the engine of growth in terms of developing domestic economy. And subsequently to this, we've created a culture whereby entrepreneurship becomes the element of success, and also people have by themselves this can-do attitude, the ability to think big and be able to do things. Finally, I also think that, I mean, again, you can see this cluster economy not just only in Dubai, but you can look at, let's say, Silicon Valley in America. I mean, this is one of the examples of success as well. I mean, and the impact of Silicon Valley, America, venture capital and all that. So it's part of the cluster economy theory. Finally, I think also most governments, I mean, they try their best in terms of putting a regulatory framework. But regulatory framework is important. It's very important, and the way it is practiced is also very important. Example I will give you, like when we in Dubai embarked our strategy of developing Dubai, besides being a commercial hub, but we also wanted Dubai to now develop itself and to become a financial center. So capital market became also one of the elements that we really wanted to focus on. And the way we did this is created a center called Dubai International Financial Center with a separate regulatory framework, okay, and world-class rules and organization. And this actually, to the extent that we went so far, even creating its own regulator like Dubai Financial Service Authority with its separate independent court system, with a separate independent arbitration system. This allowed us to attract almost 415 financial institutions in Dubai International Financial Center in the last 2 years. So, I mean, the combination of all these things have been, I would say, some sort of soft elements, but they're really the secret behind our success. Today, I mean, we have been able now to invest abroad, and we are competitive very much when we go outside. We compete with most of the world-class companies in terms of being able to acquire companies and build them to become even better investments. And this is something that has resulted from the fact that we've had an entrepreneurship environment from the word go. And my view is that what we see is a continuation of this will actually make us even a better economy going forward.
Thank you very much for your comments. Could I call upon you to express an opinion about the political opposition now to Dubai and other sovereign wealth funds investing into the United States? It seems to me that's clearly going to become a bigger issue. And how do you view that? And how do you think that is going to become a problem for the recycling of capital from the Middle East?
Well, I mean, it's a very touchy subject, and I'm not a politician, but since you've asked me to comment on it, I will try my best to be on the right side. But, well, well, that's a tough one, but let me start again. Okay. Yeah. Maybe Stephen Rush, you can speak about that, you know?
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that, you know, if in any economy, I mean, you start as a small economy, then you start going abroad and investing money abroad. I think when you invest money abroad, I think it is very important to realize there are certain rules and regulations that one has to recognize, okay? And besides that, there are some of these rules are written and some of these rules are not written, okay? Unfortunately, we tend to know the written rules, but we don't know the unwritten rules. So it's the unwritten rules that are creating the risk that, I mean, particularly in the case of DP World and so on and so forth. So I think it is in our onus, it is really to try to educate the people, the society, that if you were to look at our investment, for example, in the United States, or, I mean, we have invested a lot of money in the United States. We have actually added in terms of employment, in terms of you know, development, of economic development, and I think that this is something that will come over time. We must also recognize that we are, I mean, an unfamiliar face in a very familiar place, so it takes a while for people to get to know each other. And so I think that after the DP World experience, I think even the United States government is going to focus a lot on this and trying to create bridges that will enhance, I think, investment in the United States.
It's an answer worthy of a politician, even if you're not one, I think. Thank you very much for that. Very interesting to turn at this point, I think, to Luis Plata. Colombia's had to operate with its big neighbor. I don't want to put you necessarily on the spot and immediately comment on how you view that relationship and how that takes you forward, but I think useful if you could just give us your own thoughts, perhaps, to the question of how Colombia develops and possibly where the U.S. fits into that.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a great opportunity for me to speak here. If somebody would have suggested that a Colombian Minister for Trade and Industry would be speaking at the World Economic Forum talking about Colombia as a success economy or as a growing economy 5 years ago, they would have told me they were crazy. But Colombia is in the midst of a turnaround, big turnaround. Before I talk about my country, just let me make a quick survey, informal survey here in the room. Who's been to Colombia out of this group? Okay, I see a few hands up there. Great. And who's been told not to go to Colombia? I see more hands up there. And that's probably, you know, that's probably a perception that we still have, and it's still hard to erase. But the truth is that Colombia has changed a lot. And as we talk about this turnaround, probably it's interesting to know that Colombia is growing at a rate of almost 8% this year. It had been growing before at rates of 1.5%, 2%. It was stagnant, and now it's presenting over the last years a dynamic growth. We've also doubled our exports, and not because of the price of international commodities, but actually the manufactured exports. Tourism has more than tripled in the last 4 or 5 years, and investment as a percent of GDP has gone from 12% to 26%, and it's staying right there. That leads me to talk about FDI, and in the case of FDI, we went from flows of about 1 billion, 1.5 billion a year to constant flows of 6, 7 billion and probably about 8 billion this year in diversified sectors, not only oil and gas and mining, but also manufacturing and trade and commerce and so forth. Probably the route for this turnaround has been security, and that has been the policy of President Uribe, is security. And only with security you create confidence, and only with confidence you bring investment, both domestic and foreign investment, and these are the keys to the growth that we're experiencing in Colombia right now. For the longer-term perspective, what's on the plate? You mentioned, Jeff, relationship with the United States. Yes, we negotiated a free trade agreement with the U.S. We actually signed it last year. It has been approved by the Colombian Congress, and now we're pending approval by the U.S. Congress. Now, some of the new democratic leadership in the U.S. Congress is not so in favor of free trade agreements. This includes agreements with Korea, Peru, Panama, and Colombia, which are pending for approval. So we'll see how that develops. We're confident that the FTA will be approved, maybe not as quickly as we would like to see it approved, but I think it will go through, especially because in the end, the root causes of the challenges in Colombia of poverty and narco-trafficking and so forth, in the end are the root causes poverty. And one of the ways to fight poverty is through trade and definitely through economic growth. So by not approving the FTA, that doesn't really help the situation, does it? You would have to have the FTA in order for Colombia to grow faster. So we're confident that that will happen, but we're not depending only on the FTA with the US. Actually, we just started negotiating an FTA with Canada. We started negotiating an FTA with the European Union. We just signed an FTA with Chile. We just signed an FTA with Central America. So we're in the process of opening up the market and fostering growth in this way. In the end, I do believe that countries are like people, and we craft our own fate and our own destiny. And Colombia has made a big change. We have a long ways to go, but I think we're in the right path, and by staying the course, by making sure that we provide security, this builds confidence, and we can bring investment and have Colombians invest in the economy as well, like it's happening right now. We'll be able to raise those levels of investment from 26% of GDP currently to 32% and sustain them there, and that way sustain economic growth at 8% or above.
Thank you very much. I was recently in Sao Paulo, and I'll just share a conversation I had with a businessman in Sao Paulo who covers the whole of the region, and he said, you know, the thing you need to understand, Jeff, when you think about Latin American and South American economies, is that most of them grow at night while the politicians sleep. Now, to what extent do you think that, and obviously you've talked about the security situation, but to what extent do you think the politicians in Colombia are either leading growth by example or holding back the potential growth through policies that aren't quite appropriate?
Well, I think that there's two currents right now in Colombia. One current is saying, let's go back to import substitution policies and closed economy policies, and there's few that are on that side of the spectrum. But most politicians have realized that the countries that have grown and have made a big impact in their societies over the past 20, 30 years have done that through free trade and through capital markets and through open economies. So that's why only 4 years ago we used to have only 2 trade agreements, which were the Andean Community and the trade agreement with Mexico and Venezuela. Now we're shooting to have 9 trade agreements in place by the end of 2010, and all these agreements will have to be approved by Congress. So that says a lot about the political climate and what politicians are thinking, because otherwise we could not get the agreements in place if Congress and politicians were not also in favor of this policies.
Thank you very much for your frank answer. Let me just round off by asking you, Minju, to make some comments, and maybe I can push you in a certain direction by saying, how critical do you think it is that China now at this stage of its development embrace a freely floated currency on the capital account? It would seem that you've got to now start to look at adopting the price mechanism and a free-floating currency as the proper, shall we say, facilitators for growth from this point. I'd be interested in your remarks around that, and also how you see sustainability of this double-digit growth we're experiencing here?
Well, thank you, Jeff. This is a wonderful question, but the first one will take half an hour. Second one will take 3 hours to answer, though. And I guess nobody's ready for that one. Now, sorry again, I have to talk to audience with back to you, although you are my chairman, but I feel a little uncomfortable. Answer to your question, but talk that way. The first issue, I think many people talk about possible floating for Chinese capital account. Everybody really say you have to open it. But let me tell you a few very basic issues, okay? What will be the consequence will be very interesting. You may not thought, Chinese banking sector is pretty big and strong. Today, the whole banking sector has $6 trillion total size of assets. And we have roughly $50 trillion savings and $2.5 trillion household savings. And we expect to see in the past roughly 30 years with Chinese economic reform, the banking sector assets increased 200 times. We expect to see the Chinese banking sector assets double in the next 3 to 4 years. That means we'll reach roughly $12 trillion a year around 2010 or 11. That means probably Chinese banking sector will be the largest ever banking sector in the world. Now, when you have 2.5 today and $5 trillion household savings waiting to go out, you got to be very careful. Plus, there's $1.3 trillion foreign exchange reserves, and I expect to see it will soon pile up quickly. It's quite big, a lot size of money. And so when you say the open the capital account for Chinese market, yes, it's a great idea, people welcome for that, but the consequence also can be something very serious. I think this is a very, very crucial issue. It can be a huge impact on Chinese financial sector, Chinese economy, and also can be huge impact on the global economies. So what China adapt is a gradual approach. The gradual approach is step by step. So you will see we first allow people hold $20,000, do whatever you want, and up to $50,000 today. And we open what we call the QDIR, so it's a qualified domestic institutional investor. So you can invest your money through the QDIR to the overseas. But then today we open we call the Tianjin and Hong Kong directly tradings. But you have to sue with the Bank of China, so we're very happy to say that. And you can invest in Hong Kong equity market. So I think this is a very good gradual approach. I think it's extremely important for both China and for the international community, given such size of tool. Because in China today, roughly $2.5 trillion saving deposit earn roughly 3.2% a year. And inflation rate in the first half is 3.4, and the last month was 4.4. So you will see the incentive for this money move away from banking account to the other account, and you really see when the middle class grow, the diversification for the wealth, the people were eager to move money investing outside of China. And in addition, because Chinese the wealth is very much concentrated, because unfortunately it's income disparity issues. So if you open the door immediately, I think that will be a pretty big issue, not only for China, but also for the world. So I think that China takes a gradual approach. It's a good approach. It's a responsible approach, not only for China, and also for the world. That's for your first question. The second issue, now that's a long question for sustainability. Go back to the strategy issue. I think the big issue for China, we call, it's a classical terms, avoid the middle income trap. It's a typical happen in the Latin American, Steve, you know it's typical things. Because when the whole emerging economy take off, you go through the manufacturing goods, cheap labor things. But when you move a little bit further, you move into the middle income, you cannot compete, for example, like Vietnam, in our case, Thailand, Indonesia, because the labor cost is high. But we haven't reached the other end, the knowledge end, or idea and developed economy. So there's a huge gap. And in that case, we observed in the 60s and the 70s in the Latin Americans, the economic growth is on downside, and unemployment rate is up, inflation rate is up. So I think this is quite a big challenge. I think this is really the big issue for us to maintain the sustainability. Three things I think is fundamentally changing now today, not only for China, but also for the region. Moving away from diversification to specification. Diversification always the first step when you take up, because you use the import substitute strategy, right? So you come up, you produce as much as you can with cheap labor, cheap resource. But this world tells only specification create the wealth. You want to be rich, you got to be follow the strategy of specifications. So you have a vertical cooperation and trade, then you can move along up the value chains. I think it's the first very important thing happens. Also, the second important thing and change in China, moving away from labor-intensive products to idea, knowledge-intensive products, and more value-added, more creative service type and high-tech products. Whereas this is also a big challenge. And three.
Very quickly.
Three issues also important. Moving not away while we're moving to the globalization, also moving toward the regionalization.
American analysts would argue that China's done extraordinarily well on the exchange rate it has fixed with the United States. If Stephen Roche's nightmare scenario for US recession takes place, and we do see a race to the bottom for the dollar, what is that going to do for China's export story? How do you think the finance ministry and the People's Bank ought to react?
Well, China exports a lot to the United States, that's very true. But I think we observe and clear evidence of a decoupling of the Asian economy and the Chinese economy from American. I'm not as pessimistic as Steve. Steve, sorry, you're my good friends. I have to disagree with this time openly. And I think that's good news. And I think economically, if American economy only is a slowdown, I don't think it will have a big impact on us. And in China, the few things very important. We try to slow down exports. You see, we increase export tax, cutting all the tax subsidies, the VAT subsidies. The tax growth, actual export growth rate is down dramatically from roughly 30 to 33 in the first half, 22%. Meanwhile, the domestic consumption has become very strong. The first half, 15.4%. 15.4% domestic consumption is very strong. But still, a lot of room to go. I have to say, I'm very embarrassed to admit, China still have one of the lowest consumption ratio in the world. The national consumption ratio is only 52%. Household consumption ratio, 38%. Only slightly higher than Cambodia. You know, it's still a lot of room to go. But I think with domestic consumption pick it up, with export growth, and we try to maintain a reasonable size, U.S. economy is a slowdown. I don't think it will terribly impact Chinese economy.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got about 20 minutes or so, and you know these sessions are tight. So I invite questions from our audience. Please tell me your name, who you work for, or indeed who you represent, and then let's have a nice punchy question. Can I see some hands of people that would like to ask a question at this point? I can't believe you're that reticent. Surely there must be someone who has been provoked by the comments that have been made. Yeah, let's get a microphone to the gentleman just here in the middle at the front. Sir.
Hi there, my name is Afshin Malavi. I direct the Middle East Global Initiative at the New America Foundation in Washington, D.C. I'd like to ask Soud a question. You know, the Dubai model is very much predicated on Dubai as a hub for a growing region. So, in effect, the region will have to grow for Dubai to continue to grow. So just tell us a little bit about some of the things that Dubai is doing to help the region grow.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah. Well, Dubai, besides growing, besides creating our own domestic economy, Dubai is probably, or Dubai companies are probably the largest investor in every Middle East and North Africa country. We have invested in telecommunication, in real estate, in the financial institution. So while most of the other, I would say, GCC countries that have access to liquidity haven't done that, and we have contributed significantly through our investments. I mean, if you look at Morocco, if you look at Egypt, if you look at Tunisia, if you look at Qatar, I mean, we invested. If you look at Saudi Arabia, I mean, so our contribution has been significantly in terms of really investing money into these economies, and at the same time also we've been very strong in exporting our, I mean, I wouldn't say ideas, but the way of doing things. I mean, for example, we've also established this School of Public Kennedy, with a joint venture with the Kennedy School of Public. I don't know what it is, but it's a public school of Kennedy, which we have now taken this school, and we are actually inviting most of the government leaders to come in and experience how we have changed ourselves, the government reforms that we have taken in Dubai. And we've been sharing this with a lot of government civil servants coming from different governments. So this is in terms of the soft side. But I think the other important thing is that that is also significant is that what we have been doing over the last 10 years is we see other people copying us, you know. So in a way, it's not, when we started this journey, most of our neighbors had a lot of skepticism of whether Dubai is actually going to do it or not. Now they've seen Dubai doing it, and they see this is a way forward. So we think that our way of doing, the way of conduct in terms of business, in terms of attracting talent, in terms of our regulatory environment, that most of the neighbors will follow suit. And if you see that, I think then the pie is going to become much bigger, and there will be more to share with everybody.
Thank you very much. Do I see another hand at this point? Okay, I'll ask you a follow-up question. Have we got one? I'll ask a follow-up question anyway, because our audience seems to be a little slow today. Soud, if I can just follow up on that, I was recently down in Qatar, and I was very interested in what they're doing to try and stimulate some growth in that economy beyond what they're doing in terms of inviting in foreign companies. And it seems to me that there is still a problem with the fact that you need to bring in a lot of foreign labor and expertise to actually get anything to happen on the ground in the Middle East. I mean, perhaps I'm being extreme in the comment, but perhaps you'll take on board the spirit of the question.
So I'm sorry, I was drinking water. What was your question again?
Yeah, the question really is, do you think we are going to get to do you think we're going to get to a point in the Middle East where we actually have domestic-driven growth out of the Middle East that is non-reliant on oil revenue? Because at the moment it seems to me the domestic economies of the Middle East are not in a position to grow without the oil revenue that's being generated in the region.
Well, let me just also put some facts on the ground. Dubai economy, which grew in the last 5 years, we doubled our economy. We are today only perhaps maybe less than 5% oil dependent. Our GDP is only less 5% oil dependent. And if you take UAE in general, UAE, we are probably less than 23% oil dependent. And you must also remember that UAE is one of the richest countries in the world. I mean, in terms of, we produce almost 2.7 million barrels of oil per day. I mean, so even with the fact that we've got so much oil, we've managed to diversify our economies very much away from oil. So, and it's a really an achievement over the last 10 years. Now, obviously, we are very unique in terms of our GDP formation and all that. What is happening in that part of the world is that, I mean, inherently, we are not, these countries, like in the Gulf countries, are very vast countries in terms of land size and all that, but they are not highly populated. So it's not densely populated. You know, our population, for example, in Dubai is only 1.5 million. And out of that, 20% are UAE locals, 80% are foreigners. So, you know, in order to sustain these economies, we have to create enough domestic demand. And to create domestic demand, we have to attract people to come to that region. And that's, I think it's something that is going to continue, and it's going to continue because at the end of the day, these 5 countries produce about $2.3 trillion of excess liquidity. I mean, they can invest this money in the countries, but they would have to invest outside. But we need to also invest in our economies to create infrastructure, to create employment, and to improve our system of education, improve our healthcare system. And I'll tell you what, we will not be able to do this unless we attract the best talent. I mean, and this is something that is, I think, it's a positive element from our side, because if you were to develop any economy, you need to attract the best talents. You need to attract the best brains available. And since we do not have a lot of these available within our economies, we need to have this foreign input to us. So I look at it as a very positive element, and I think that it will continue for a long time, okay? And I think we should continue. You know, I'll tell you why am I saying that. If you look at Dubai, you know, the cosmopolitan nature of Dubai made Dubai very unique, you know. And this uniqueness is what really created this entrepreneurship culture, the environment that we're talking about, the can-do business attitude, and it helps us a lot. So I think that the growth of foreign labor is going to continue, and I think it should continue because it makes us more competitive, it increases communication, and also I think it makes us as people more capable and equipped to deal with other nations.
Okay, all right, thank you very much for taking the question. Yeah, hand went up down the back here.
I'm a journalist from a local newspaper, Peninsula Morning, a Liaoning Daily Group. I have a question for Mr. Stephen Roach. Recently, the private equity is a hot issue in China. Could you say something about the international private equity have tiptoed in Chinese capital market? This equity, private equity, bring more good challenge, more good advantage or disadvantage to China's stock market. Can you give some advice for Chinese enterprises to attract equity, private equity? And is there some risk for Chinese enterprise? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Stephen.
The question is the outlook and role for private equity in China?
It is, yeah.
First of all, private equity investors around the world right now are very interested in China. If I ever want to see my private equity friends, I can no longer see them in New York. I usually see them in Beijing. The piece that's missing in the equation right now, I think, is the development of a second board, a NASDAQ-like market that allows liquidity, equity strategies, exit strategies for private equity investors. That is coming. That will be a very important development to complement and add to the equity culture in China. What we are impressed with now is as we look at the development of entrepreneurial activity and new companies in China is a sea change between the emergence of corporate activity away from state-owned enterprise reform, concentrated on coastal China, increasingly moving into the development, emergence of vibrant, dynamic private economies in China, in central, in some cases even the western portions of China. This is an important trend. Private equity investors are, I think, increasingly focused on that, and over time will be a critically important complement to the industrial growth culture that is now evident increasingly in China.
Stephen, the trade union movement in Europe feels very strongly about the role that private equity has played in putting people out of jobs, in one or two individuals earning very vast amounts of money, apparently on the back of loading companies with debt that it will take many years for them to be able to pay back through regular operations. The fear, I would guess, in the developed world is that we see a replication of some of that take place. Now, as a capitalist, clearly you need creative destruction, but many of these economies don't have a tradition of allowing this kind of pace of change to happen. What do you think you could say at this point that will perhaps give some comfort to the policymakers who are thinking, is this a good idea to let the Blackstones of this world come and tread through my economy?
Look, I think the pushback we're seeing against private equity right now in the developed world, Jeff, is political. It's just crass politics. It's grounded in a rather extraordinary development in the rich countries of the world, where if you look at the shares of national income for most major developed economies in the world, the share going to labor income is at a record low. The share going to capital income is at a record high. Moreover, there are disparities within the labor income where the few at the top have captured most of the gains. So the politicians are going after the excess returns to capital, going after the excess income of the super wealthy, and private equity in many cases represents some of the excesses. There's also in the United States, as part and parcel of this, been legislative initiatives going after hedge funds, the excesses of executive compensation, and I would dare say that the anti-trade, anti-globalization initiatives also can be explained painfully, correctly, in this type of framework.
All right. I'll just stop you there because I think you've expressed your view well. Let's get a gentleman there in the middle with a blue shirt on, I think, as far as I can see. If we can get a microphone to you, sir.
Thank you. Alberto Balmer from Venezuela. I know we're talking about dynamic economies. Our country, and directing my question to the person from Dubai. And of course, seeing Colombia's example, which is really doing its best to develop. But Venezuela right now is somehow dragging other economies of Latin America down a different path. And one of the things I would like to ask, seeing the person from Dubai, from Colombia, from Vietnam, and China especially, is there a way of having a rescue operation? Because what we are doing right now in Venezuela is that we're scaring talent away, we're scaring investment away, and of course we're based on a non-meritocratic system. And I really think Latin America, if Venezuela and the countries it's influencing turn around and start using these, what you have been explaining just now, I think it would have a great impact on the rest of the world.
Sir, thank you very much for the question. Well, let's take some views. The question was directed at you, Soud, so maybe we'll start with you, and then anybody else who feels they want to jump in.
Well, it's a very, well, I'll tell you what, I think, you know, and as I said from the beginning, one of the most important things is to develop, it doesn't matter what government system you have, whether it's democracy, whether it's, you know, totalitarian or it's monarchy. I think the first and foremost, it's really the ability of the government to distinguish ownership and management of the companies, because majority of these economies you will find the government are the state-owned companies, are the biggest companies. So the first thing is that if the government can distinguish ownership and management and create corporations that are run on a commercial basis, I think that can become a significant influence to the growth of the economy. And another thing that is also important is that we also experience a lot of these things in some of our neighboring countries. what they tend to do is that they select people who are wrong people to run this corporation. And it's not because they're the best people, it's because they know the government or minister's son, minister's, some sort of relationship. And I think that if you attract the best people, you would be able to create this company. And also the third element is that you need to give incentive to after you select these people to run these government companies, you have to share with them the ability of them creating wealth. In our case, I work for a government, semi-government institution, but we share, the wealth. Both the wealth is created for the shareholder, but also is created for the employees as well. And that gives you a different behavior, an incentive to work hard. And if you don't do a good job, you're going to be thrown out. So, I think this is what we have done pretty well. I don't know whether it answers your questions, but...
Thank you. Thank you very much. Minju.
Yeah, let me go back to a little bit of fundamentals for that. It's a very interesting issue. Because of globalization and because of emerging of Asian economies, I think there are few fundamental changes in economic theories and that will have profound impact on the world. The first issue is growth theory. We're looking for the old growth theories. You have only capital and land. The new growth theory put more variable, which is human capital. Today, the growth theory recognizes the importance of a company because a company being a unit create a value, get technology and innovation. I think a company will play a very important role in these growth theories and growth economies. I never ever thought of before. So we need a government policy, pro-company and market. The second huge change is in trade theory. When everybody learned the Ricardian trade, absolutely advantage and a comparative advantage is based on the resource. But today, the trade is based on scale of economy. So most of trade happen, and most of the growth of trade happen on the scale of economy, not on the resource. So this will change fundamentally the whole world picture because for the country like China, if we don't have enough resource, we still can trade because we have a scale of economy. I think that's the change of the whole thing. This is really, I think it's a very important issue. The third big issue is I think we learn, be very conservative when you do the financial reform. I think no one today has passed, as an emerging economy, the financial test. In the Latin American, when the countries reached a certain level, 2,000 to 3,000 US per capita, when had the financial crisis, when go to the liberalize the capital market and at the banking systems, they got crisis. There's Mexico crisis, Brazil crisis, Chile crisis. Asia economy had 10 years golden growth experience and get into the crisis in 1997 because they opened the capital account to go to the liberal or the interest rate exchange rates 3-4 years ago. And even Korea, I still remember at that time I was in the World Bank. Korea celebrate as a graduate from developing world, promote into the OECD group 6 months later, and $56 billion debts bring them back to developing world. That was 1997. So the third issue is be conservative when you do financial reform, if I can say so. Thank you.
Okay, Minju, thank you very much. We're very close to the end here, but I think it would be worth having a comment from the Colombian view as you look at your neighbor in Venezuela. So maybe we can wrap up with you. What advice would you give to the Venezuelan entrepreneur today?
Well, every time I'm asked to speak about Venezuela, I have to be very, very careful. And there's a fine line that we walk, and there's a balance that we have. Our economies are totally intertwined. Yet we have chosen different paths. Colombia has chosen a path of open market, attracting foreign investment, things that I mentioned earlier. And Venezuela has chosen a path which they call the endogenous development model. That's how they've actually named it. And basically is trying to develop those industries within the country. It's difficult to attract investment in those cases because obviously when you expropriate or you nationalize companies or industries, well, investors are not going to be flocking to your country. On the contrary, and we've seen that, and you know, like I said, it's a path, and we have to respect the path that countries choose. Venezuela has something that us Colombians don't have, and it's the oil revenues. And a country which has such huge oil revenues can choose to do different things. In our case, given that we don't have oil revenues, or that our oil revenues are small and becoming smaller as a proportion of our GDP and our exports, we have to look at other things, and we have to look at, how do we develop our own industries, how do we attract investment, how do we open markets that need to be open. When you trade an internationally traded commodity like oil, you don't need free trade agreements, you just trade the oil. When you trade, products and services that require agreements, it's a whole different ball game. So I think we've chosen different paths, and it's hard for me to give an assessment or to give an opinion which one's right and which one's wrong. I think they've clearly stated their path. We've taken a different approach, and that's because of our different economic structure.
Diplomatic to the end.
I believe that's the right approach for us.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for the panel, and let's thank our panelists for being with us.